This episode is brought to you by Content Multiplied. It's not a secret anymore that content creation is really important, but very few people talk about the importance of consistency. And I myself have really struggled with that consistency. And for that reason, I looked for a solution, and Content Multiplied was a really good one for me. Since using them, I've been able to focus on what I enjoy the most, which is recording podcasts, while Myla and her team are really taking care of everything else. Whether you have a podcast, you're holding keynote speeches, you're doing a YouTube series, you're writing a blog, a newsletter, a book, the Content Multiplied team can really take whatever you're producing and repurpose it into a series of micro content, and suddenly you have dozens and dozens of pieces that can be shared for you, and Content Multiplied even takes care of that for you. Unlock your content superpower with Content Multiplied and go to contentmultiplied.com today. That's contentmultiplied.com. Thanks, Myla, and let's go into the show. You are listening to Impact Hustlers, and I am your host, Maiko Schaffrath. I have made it my mission to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs to solve some of the world's biggest social and environmental problems. And for this reason, I am speaking to some of the best entrepreneurs out there who are solving problems such as food waste, climate change, poverty, and homelessness. My goal is that Impact Hustlers will inspire you either by starting an impact business yourself, by joining the team of one, or by taking a small step, whatever that may be, towards being part of the solution to the world's biggest problems. In today's episode, I speak to Arthur Woods, founder of Mathison. Mathison is a platform helping organizations taking diversity, equity, and inclusion seriously by allowing them to set their strategy and track progress towards their goals. Mathison also provides really tangible tools such as a text analyzer, which helps eliminate non-inclusive language from job specs, anonymize LinkedIn profiles to eliminate bias, and also help recruiters plan their interviews based on best practice interview questions. Mathison is now used by companies like Sonos, Accenture, and TripAdvisor, and many, many more. And I'm very excited to have you on the show, Arthur. It's a topic that's close to my heart. And thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's start with your personal journey. You're an experienced entrepreneur. This is not the first organization you founded. You're an entrepreneur, you're a community builder. I'm really excited to kind of cover your journey a bit, but I'd like to understand what drives you to solve this problem of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Why is this important to you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a wonderful question. I'm personally driven in this work because I grew up in a very rural town in a single parent family. I came out in the LGBTQ community halfway through college. And I actually experienced bias in the job interview, in the very first job, basically interview that I had right after college. And I overheard an interviewer use a homophobic slur, and it really kind of shut me down in many ways. It sort of caused me to think I'm not safe to be myself in this new job. Maybe I can't come out early in my career. And so even just experiencing that small kind of experience of not feeling safe, not feeling included, to me was just an indication that for so many people in their daily jobs, work is not a source of empowerment. It's not a place that you feel included and a sense of belonging. And the more that we can create environments where people are their best at work, their best in a hiring process, the better it is for everyone. So I really became fascinated with this idea of focusing on how we innovate in the workplace to bring out the best in people, to create inclusive environments, how we can sort of rethink the whole way that we build equity in our hiring process. And and rethink the way that we go about recruiting to be more inclusive and representative of so many different communities that aren't typically on the radar for companies. That's what really fuels me in this work.
Amazing. Let's talk a bit about the problem. Me having worked a little bit in that space as well as a freelancer, as a consultant and advisor, I think my impression is that probably by now you won't find a big corporate, at least, that doesn't commit to diversity and equity and inclusion, right? It's like almost like the sustainability pledge. It's kind of accepted, so to say. But then the problem is actually implementing it. And that's where
Yes,
there's
that's
like
right.
just massive differences between companies. You know, it's always nice to have nice claims on diversity, but then what do you day to day? So, you know, can you give us a bit more of a sense of your feeling on how far we've come in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what's the state of this at the moment?
Yeah. Well, you know, the first thing I would just say is that without a doubt, this body of work has gone from being an elective to an essential category, right? You know, in many ways, there's no question as to whether an organization needs to basically invest in this. I think everyone understands the business case for the work. I think people are really struggling with how to go from intent to impact. And the challenge is that the Great Resignation has now led a lot of people to have this rush and this sense of urgency in this work, and it's led a lot of teams to not have a lot of capacity to drive it. And so basically, what we're seeing right now is that a lot of organizations have made these huge public commitments to advance their DEI work, and they haven't made enough progress. And they're struggling with a lack of resources. They actually, in many cases, don't know where to focus. They don't know where their gaps are. And our big focus as a platform has been to give organizations the insights and the analytics and the understanding as to how they can really sort of mobilize a DEI strategy so that they know in the limited capacity and attention that they have where they can actually focus that limited purview. And so we have a whole analytics platform that helps organizations better uncover where they have gaps in their systems, where they have bias in their talent processes. And the whole view there is to give organizations a roadmap as to where they need to focus.
Got it. And explain to us how that solution actually works. Like, what are the inputs that companies need to give you, and what are exactly the outputs that your product gives then?
Yeah. So basically, what the cool thing about the way that we're approaching this work is we're giving organizations a framework for how they can basically assess their talent systems. And we've created this assessment called our Equity Index. It gives organizations a set of measures for basically where they have gaps in their hiring processes, where they have a chance to shift policies and practices to be more equitable. And rather than make this a multi-month process, this system enables them to input their current activities and practices, and it turns around a set of insights and recommendations for how they can improve. What's great is that this whole process is an ongoing assessment, and so organizations that are trying to really take real action and they don't know where to start, this gives them a bit of a heat map as to where they need to focus.
Got it. And I think from my limited experience, I would say like very often some diversity policies, or maybe not the policies, but the actual implementation tends to become quite one-dimensional sometimes. So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
saying, okay, we want to get more female employees into a sector that's male-dominated, and then you end up with a diverse organization that's more female employees in there, but maybe all of them white or majority of them
Yeah.
white. And I think a lot of times either organizations think about this very one dimensional, or they almost like put it into different buckets.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you think about the very definition of diversity? What is it that you're advocating with your customers? What's the kind of definition of diversity? What dimensions does it have for you?
Are we looking at? Yeah. So our thought leadership, our work was all about dimensionalizing diversity across 12 different underrepresented communities, ranging from people with disabilities, the older experienced worker community, the formerly incarcerated community, the neurodivergent community. And what we found is that a lot of leaders look at diversity in a very myopic way, based on very limited insights, limited knowledge. And what happens is essentially they leave out entire communities that should be included and empowered in our strategies. So by taking this approach of looking at 12 different dimensions of diversity, we're essentially focused on how to help leaders cast a wider net, how to help leaders build advocacy of different communities that they didn't typically have on the radar, and to ensure that they're being mindful of all of the different viewpoints of communities that maybe they didn't typically notice or see on LinkedIn. What's happening in our space today is that a lot of people are using visual ID to try and guess a person's diverse dimensions by looking at their picture and their name on a place like LinkedIn. And that really creates challenges in this work because, as we know, there are so many different dimensions of diversity that we can't always visibly see. Diversity can be intersectional. We might be part of multiple communities. And also, we can't sort of assume, based on limited knowledge of a candidate or a team member, the extent of their full background and their experience. And so this is really where we want to create an environment where A, we're aware of different dimensions of diversity. B, we create psychologically safe environments where everyone can sort of speak up about the different communities that they represent. And we hold the space for these communities, not only in the way that we source, but also in the environments we create for people in the hiring process and in the team that we're creating. And it's a whole different kind of holistic and systemic way of thinking about this work.
Got it. I love that. I love those dimensions, and I think. Do you think there's like companies out there that are doing this really, really well? Is there like some best practices already that others can copy, or is this a lot of original work that you have to do and be like, nope, there's some good examples, but maybe not great examples? How do you think about that?
Great question. Well, I would start by saying that first of all, there are companies doing this work really well, and I would say bright spots of work that's going well. I look at groups like, 23andMe that created these pillars of their DEI strategy that have made DEI not just about how they're hiring and how they're engaging their team and how they're reducing bias in their systems, but also about the product that they're building externally. We see basically groups like, Horizon Media that have made DEI really an organizational-wide effort. They've really mobilized the broader team in these efforts really successfully. We see groups, honestly, like Pixar that have shifted the way that they're fundamentally designing their product, and the way that they're designing their the experience that they deliver in their product for equity, and that's really exciting. Same with EA Games. EA Games has essentially changed the way that they're looking at the way they build their video games to be representative, and it's actually changing the experience they create for their consumers. So the way that DEI is really kind of manifesting in different unique ways. Not only from the way that we hire, but also the products we deliver. That to me is what makes this all really strategic and really exciting.
Got it. And do you have the feeling things are moving in the right direction? I mean, it seems like at least, the big forward-thinking tech companies, big corporates, they seem to be
Yeah.
sometimes way too slow, move in the right direction. On the other hand, you have like this constant back and forth in certain parts of society and regulation and politics. You live in Florida. There's been kind of the
Yep.
"Don't Say Gay" bill that's been in the news recently. Um, uh, what's your thought about that? Are we gradually moving into the right direction, or is this a constant battle that's still being fought with some parts of society?
It actually has. I think there are areas where there are huge, moments of progress and then setbacks. I think when we see some of the legislation that's happening in places like Florida and places like Texas, that are basically creating major barriers for the LGBTQ, the transgender community. To me, it signals that there are many leaders that are not on board for this work, and that's directly influencing policy. It also is creating a pathway where the private sector, where organizations that have autonomy to make decisions that are right for their people, for their workforce, can make a huge impact. So, for us, sadly, this is a movement that that involves people on very different parts of the journey. Some that are extremely resistant and leading with a lot of fear and hatred, and others that are actually pushing the boundaries and doing really noble work that's working. And our goal is to focus in on the areas where leaders have a lot of intent to make progress, and they're just lacking the tools to do it. And hopefully that means that, for the rest of the workforce, we have people coming on board and engaging in the work and creating communities of practice to advance the work in new, exciting ways too. Right.
Got it. One of our biggest groups of listeners to this podcast is entrepreneurs that want to build companies that make a difference in the world, solve social and environmental problems. And one theme that I've been keen on, having seen quite a few startups from the inside or as a friend or advisor on the outside, I think sometimes the challenge I see, especially with early stage companies, is that there's such a pressure to move fast that sometimes, topics like diversity, equity, and inclusion can be, not ignored maybe, but, deprioritized versus we're just gotta get whoever's like applying first and is a great candidate, we should just get them in, right? So I'm sure you would argue that it's important to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion from day one of building your company. And I'm sure you have loads of advice to share because you've built companies from scratch. You're on both sides of the equation. So what would be your advice for founders when they're just starting out to build a culture and build processes that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion from day one in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming maybe as well, just practically speaking?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I think the earlier an organization can embed this work and invest in this work, the better and the easier it is. The hardest part of this work is when organizations wait to mobilize the work. They end up waiting until they're big and they're having to reverse engineer a lot of practices. And it means that, honestly, they haven't embedded DEI in their DNA, and they're having to do a lot of culture change and systems change at a scale when they're just not as agile. So the earlier an organization can essentially, get this into the daily vernacular of the way that they're growing. What we think is that means founders and their founding teams having a conversation about what does diversity mean to us? Why does it matter to us? What are the ways we're committing to being more equitable in the way that we hire? What do we want our team to resemble and why, right? And having these kind of fundamental philosophical questions and conversations up front sets the organization to have much more intention in getting diversity embedded from the beginning. And that's exciting because if we think about it, an organization that is growing rapidly, that is trying to do this work, but honestly is facing constraints and facing a lack of capacity, it'll only get harder as they continue to grow, So we do, we have a lot of conversations with early stage entrepreneurs, trying to get the work embedded early, trying to give a roadmap to organizations that can get the work started early. Part of how we sell our system as an end-to-end DEI tech platform is we don't want an early stage organization that's growing to have to choose between sourcing, reducing bias, training your team, building your DEI roadmap. You should be able to do all of that in one kind of effort, right? And the more that we can be this end-to-end partner for you all to do the work early on, we believe it makes the work much more possible.
Got it. Amazing. If you look at existing solutions out there, let's say, if you ignore Mathison, what tend your what do your clients tend to use already? What's kind of the best
What are some
alternative
of the things
to
out there?
Mathison at the moment, and how does Mathison then make a difference to those customers?
Yeah. Well, what our space right now has a lot of single point tools and solutions. So you have, some tools, their only function is to help you measure your gaps, right? You have other tools, their only function is to help you write inclusive job descriptions. Others who only do sourcing, others who only do training, and it ends up becoming this pretty large tech stack and solution stack of these different things. And it also means that in many cases we don't. It, you know, it ends up being a very expensive proposition for the organization that wants to do this work. So we find that we're uniquely coming in by threading these different disparate pieces together, making it accessible for organizations to, basically have a holistic strategy. And the whole value proposition there is that we're collecting a tremendous amount of data and giving organizations insights that they don't typically have. And so, there are larger enterprises, I would say, that sometimes want to choose a single point approach to the work. We don't really find that to be always, the case for that high growth, earlier stage organization, just because, honestly, it becomes challenging when you are, you as an earlier stage organization that's trying to do everything, honestly has to choose between one thing or another, and so that us having this end to end approach, makes the work much more sustainable.
Hi, it's Maiko here. I want to interrupt this episode briefly to make you aware of two exciting things that are going on here at Impact Hustlers. First of all, if you are a founder solving social and environmental problems and you're looking to connect to like minded founders like yourself, you're looking to learn from some of the most experienced entrepreneurs, experts, and investors in the world, and you want some support in actually fundraising for your startup, we've built the Impact Hustlers community. We are now about 100 entrepreneurs and founders, and we're growing every month with more founders from all over the world joining us. And we're really here to support each other. And our goal is to build the most supportive ecosystem for impact-driven founders. So if you're a founder, head to impacthustlers.com/community to learn more. And if you're not a founder, but you want to work for impact driven companies, we have also recently launched something really exciting for you. And that is the Impact Hustlers Talent Collective. This is a group of some of the most ambitious and talented individuals in the world that want to use their talent to make a difference in the world and work for some of the most innovative, impact driven companies. If you're keen to join the Talent Collective, this is all free of charge, obviously. You can submit your application to the Talent Collective on impacthustlers.com/jobs. And what will happen as a result is that companies will start approaching you through our Talent Collective and share job opportunities with you. We'll also share our weekly jobs update with you, where you see relevant jobs in the field of impact, including from all the previous podcast guests. So you will actually see opportunities from companies that have been covered here on the show, and also companies that are members of our Impact Hustlers community. So go to impacthustlers.com/jobs if you're looking for a job, or if you're a founder and need some support, go to impacthustlers.com/community. Okay, let's get back to the episode now. Got it. Let's dive a bit deeper into your entrepreneurial journey. We covered it very briefly in the beginning, but I'd really like to extract some lessons learned from you for founders that are just starting out. And you've been on the entrepreneurial journey a few times now. What has been the most painful lesson that you've learned on your journey so far?
Yeah, I would say the most painful lesson I've learned on the journey is that Rome wasn't built in a day. That while having impatience to act and to create progress, some things do take time. I think that sense of urgency and that sense of rush and impatience as entrepreneurs is sometimes really a strength, and other times you have to really, you have to eat your own medicine, right? In terms of knowing when to slow down. So I think that's been a painful piece. I think, you know, another piece I would just generally say is that there is a moment right now where not everyone, especially when you're doing soulful work that has a mission driven component to it, there are times where um, it's going to be just the case that not every leader is ready for what you have to offer, or not every leader is philosophically bought into what you have to offer. And, that might mean that you're early. It might mean that you're talking to the wrong person. It's a painful thing when you have something that is very deeply rooted in your values that you share with someone and they don't align to those values, right? So I think that's just something to also think about. Is just the fact that we sometimes we're not we're not always going to have that connection to someone who really sees the world in the same way we do, and we have to be sort of ready for that. Not everyone is going to be a good target, a good partner.
Mm. And how do you deal with that rejection, I guess, as an impact driven founder, especially, like we've had a bit more than 100 episodes, and it's just it's just everybody that I interview is just so mission driven, really cares about the problem that they're solving. And especially, sometimes these moments can come about where you feel like almost everyone rejects you, and you just have like this kind of massive backlash, or like at least disapproval. Yeah, it's some sort of rejection coming when you're trying to convince people. How do you deal with that psychologically, but then also practically?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's a few things. One is that we have to just be resilient and remind ourselves about sort of why we're doing this work, and our original theory of change. Because honestly, there are moments in this work where there are just moments in this work where we're not going to always things are not going to work out. We're going to be working on something that faces headwinds, and where it's not constantly working smoothly, and we need that kind of grit and resilience and willpower to keep going. And I'm reading this great book by Dan Sullivan called "The Gain versus the Gap." And as entrepreneurs, the whole kind of notion is, and it's largely with the spirit of entrepreneurs, we oftentimes are living in the gap. It is the difference between where we are and the ideal state, right? And we sort of measure ourselves against, what are we not doing? What more could we be doing? How are we not comparing to others like us? And we drive ourselves sometimes very crazy living in this gap mindset. And his whole point is to focus on the gains. Where have you made progress? What have you learned? Maybe about, what hasn't worked that you can translate into what you do next, and a very different mindset. And it's a bit of a glass half full versus empty mindset, but it goes even beyond that, because as entrepreneurs, we're constantly, charting a new path. We're going into territory no one's explored before. And by the nature of doing that, we're making progress, even when we're hit, with a bush or a branch on our new path into uncharted territory. We are still making progress, and we have to kind of measure ourselves against the progress that we're making on a daily basis. So I really love that mindset. So one of the things I'm doing on a daily basis now that a really dear friend and fellow entrepreneur recommended that I do is, at the end of every day, I am writing down 3 things that were the gains for the day. 3 wins, 3 areas where I made progress, 3, it could be 3 things I learned today. And then 3 gains I'd like to make tomorrow, right? It's a really interesting practice. It takes less than 2 minutes every single day, but it really ends every day in a very, I think, forward-looking, positive mindset. And it just constantly returns you back to, celebrating the win, celebrating that progress, right?
That's really good advice. I mean, especially I can relate to this so much. I grew up in Germany. We tend to have a culture that we look at criticism and don't celebrate much, I think, especially my personality type as well. So, running Impact Hustlers, running this podcast, very much constantly being unhappy. Oh, this wasn't great. This wasn't great. Oh, I should improve the production quality. Oh, this has to change. Oh, I need to make sure to ship my guests amazing microphones so that the sound quality is better. And also running a community of entrepreneurs as part of Impact Hustlers, and constantly saying what's wrong, what's not working. Is everyone forgetting what's working and how much value people get out of it? Yeah, it's so easy to get into the mindset. It's really, yeah, it you brought a point home for me for sure, to just like constantly remind myself, listen, like you don't need to be delusional, of like everything is great, all good, but it's important to see the progress and celebrate the progress. Be aware of anything you need to improve, but that's it.
We need that. We need that. And that's what gives us the resilience. That like we are constantly making progress. There is always something we're doing, even in the days where it feels like we're going 3 steps forward and 4 steps backward. Right? Those 3 steps we still need to celebrate. We need to realize like what caused us to go back the 4 steps, and what can we learn from that. That's also a gain. Right?
Hmm. Did you have a moment in your entrepreneur career where you were like close to a I want to give up moment, or a moment where you kind of lost hope, or anything like that? Did you ever get close to that, or did you manage to kind of build this habit of looking forward?
Well, I'll tell you, I've had multiple of those moments, honestly,
Mm.
and I've started a couple different companies, some of which are still around today, some of which are not, right? And I've had multiple moments where I've said, why on earth did I choose this path? This is really hard, you know. At the same time, I've had multiple moments in the same journey and with the same organizations or the same ventures where I just sort of said to myself, wow, it's so fulfilling doing this work, bringing something to life and hopefully helping people and hopefully creating economic stability, right? And the truth is, it's just the nature of this work is there are going to be challenges, and there are going to be days where you self doubt. There are going to be days where you feel like things aren't working, and we just have to sort of take those all in strides. And what it means is that there's also just going to be there's just going to have to continue to be a lot of resilience and not letting the things that aren't working defeat us. Otherwise, it just ends up becoming a painful process all along the way.
Yeah, I've spoken to some early stage founders, quite a few founders, like about this topic, and sometimes, especially in the early stages, where maybe you have a team of 5 people, 10 people, you're the founder, and you're going through a really difficult time where maybe you're kind of heading towards losing hope, but you don't want to lose hope yet because you believe in the mission, but it's very
Hmm.
difficult and tough. I think some founders I've spoken to, and I've definitely been there as well, find it really hard to manage that. Like, should I share that with my team? Will that now like destroy morale and like make me look weak as an entrepreneur? Like, how should I actually deal with that? Do you have any advice for founders, especially in the early stages where you have such a small team and like your team can kind of smell how you feel about stuff very quickly? How should you deal with that, or how did you in the past?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges, and I know you see this in part of why your community is so special, right? Is uh, entrepreneurs have very few people that they sometimes feel like they can talk to. You want to create stability and positivity on your team. You sometimes can't feel like you can't speak to your investors. Your board, even sometimes is there. Everyone sort of, you don't want to make anyone panic, right? But the truth is, I think, and something I try to really sort of tell myself as well is, we have to sort of lead as much as we can with positivity and with with also vulnerability, and the ability to sometimes just be really direct about how you're doing and where you need help. And I think people respond really well to basically to just be transparency and positivity and also when they're brought in and they can be part of the solution, that really makes a big difference, right?
Mm, got it. Um, What do you think you actually, we didn't talk much about that, but I'd like to cover maybe at least one question. You are an angel investor and advisor to startups as well. You've invested in the likes of Masterclass, Better, Brex, and loads of others, actually. Um, uh, and maybe from both perspectives, both from a
Hmm.
founder perspective that you've been in, and from an investor perspective. What's the role of investors in, contributing to solutions like yours? And I'm thinking definitely about, like the sometimes the biases that can be in the ecosystem. I imagine when you pitched Mathison to investors, there's definitely a group of investors that don't get it and
Yeah.
may kind of play it down and be like, okay, is this even such a big problem or so? I don't know. But I've heard stories like that from people.
Hmm.
How do you think about that? What's the role of investors in pushing the ecosystem forward, and especially solutions like yours?
Well, first of all, I think if you have an investor who doesn't believe in DEI or doesn't believe in sort of the importance of diversity right now, then we think it's sort of a non-starter in terms of a partnership with them. I think there are so many that understand the role that representation and that equity play in this process, and how urgent it is, and how many organizations are struggling with it, and also just the business case for it. So I think we have enough investors, that truly do believe in the philosophy of this work, that I would say just focus on them. And for the other ones that aren't really on board, they might just be sort of signaling that they are. I think they're going to come around. I think they're going to many of them are going to lose out on major opportunities because of that mindset. So that is our, we're of the belief right now that there are enough, again, there are enough philosophically aligned folks right now that also many investors who understand the investment community, itself is not representative. And part of where, like, a lot of ventures that are being backed are not very representative. So there's a whole trickle down impact of what's leading to a lack of representation that we think we need to really address. And so that's really sort of what we're at the heart of addressing here. And again, we're very blessed to have multiple underrepresented investors that are on our board, that have backed us, that truly believe in the not only the major opportunity with DEI, but also the chance for societal impact in this work. And those are the types of folks we want to partner with, right?
Hmm. Got it. I've got one more question for you. If you think about the next 10 years, how does the world look like in 10 years' time if Mathison continues to succeed, I have to say?
Yeah, so I love that question. One is, it embraced a much more holistic and representative definition of diversity, and the different diversity dimensions embraced. Um, the second is organizations that are embedding this work at the very beginning of their journey, in starting and feeling like they have the resources like ours to do that, and the systems to facilitate it early, early, early. I think vastly expanded set of DEI metrics that we all have access to. So we're not just looking at diversity among a couple different data points, but we have a much more comprehensive way of measuring equity in our systems, of assessing the inclusive cultures that we're building. And again, we're looking at different dimensions of diversity as well. So we're seeing a much more holistic picture of DEI. And then finally, I think it means organizations overall, leaders outside of HR and DEI, taking responsibility for this work and saying, I'm a part owner. I'm accountable as much as you are. You as the head of HR, head of diversity, equity, inclusion, are not the only leaders that need to be driving this work. We really need everyone.
Mm. Got it. I love the mission you're on. I love the real tangible tools you've developed. This isn't about branding, isn't about marketing. It's really about real tangible progress with the tools that you've developed. So anybody that's recruiting talent or even just trying to make a difference in their company's diversity, equity, and inclusion journey, check out Mathison. I've been quite inspired by the solutions you've created. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you for building the community.
Really, really appreciate you joining us today.
Yes.
Thanks, Arthur.
Thank you so much.
It was good to have you. Thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned some valuable lessons from today's guest. I want to share two things with you. First of all, if you're a founder and you're solving a social or an environmental problem with your company, there is something that we've launched recently to support founders like you and to introduce you to more founders that are like minded and that are solving very difficult problems in the world. And that is the Impact Hustlers community. It is a community of over 100 founders that solve problems like climate change, education, the crisis in healthcare, and really pushing the boundaries on what's possible. And what we do as a community, we connect to each other. We run mastermind groups where you can connect to other entrepreneurs and founders. We bring experienced investors, entrepreneurs, and experts in to run workshops and Ask Me Anything sessions. And you can also connect to others in our online community. And we have something for those of you that are actually fundraising. We have an investor matching tool where you get introduced to relevant investors based on the startup that you are building. But it may be the case that you're not a founder and you just want to be part of the change and you want to join some of these companies that you've learned about here at the Impact Hustlers podcast. And we've got something for you as well. We've recently launched the Impact Hustlers Talent Collective. This is a group of some of the most ambitious individuals in the world that want to make a change and an impact with their careers. And you can join the Talent Collective, obviously completely free of charge. You can apply to it and we will introduce you on a regular basis to companies recruiting people like yourself. So you'll get access to exclusive job opportunities from companies that have been on the podcast, but also beyond that. So make sure that you go to impacthustlers.com/jobs if you're looking for jobs in the social impact space. Even if you're not actively looking right now, you should still sign up and be part of our talent collective. And if you're a founder, don't forget, go to impacthustlers.com/community. Okay, thanks very much for listening and bye. See you at the next episode.